both of you guys, I've watched you work crazy hours. I can't keep up with you. I get tired just listening to how hard you guys work. Years ago, I used to be an alpine ski coach and invited Tom to come speak at our awards dinner to do a motivational athletic piece.
That was a long time ago.
And I was in shock in the beginning anyway, that you had driven from Albany to Jay Peak that night in a snowstorm. And you arrived in the nick of time, and I went down and met you and brought you up into the auditorium where they were doing it at Jay Peak. And you were reading Facebook messages from kids from the school you had presented 6 hours earlier on what it was. And I remember you giving me the elbow and saying, read this one. And it was anonymous. I don't know who the kid was. And it was a long list of the kid talking about his experience at one of your sessions. And I used to get really choked up when I had mentioned this story too. If you were to take the run on and sugar it down to what the kid was saying, he essentially said, "Sorry to bother you, Mr. Murphy. I was planning to kill myself after school today, but your presentation gave me the hope to hold on, possibilities exist." That floored me. And tears streamed down my face when I read that message that night, and it still emotionally attaches to me. But it also gives proof positive of the hope message that you guys are implementing in our kids, and it's being received. They're getting the message. I don't know if you want to, and you have shared messages with me before on occasion when, we're good friends, or at least I call you a good friend. I hope I'm the same to you.
Yeah.
And these messages over the year just have really hit me hard. I mean, one less dramatic than that you showed to me once was a 10-year-old boy that said, "Mr. Murphy, today was the best day of my life." And I was instantly happy. And I was like, "God, Tom's out doing a great job. The kid's getting the information and the hope and the help that he needed." But then a half a second later, I went back and I went, oh, I felt sad and depressed that this kid's best day of his life was getting your presentation. Now, while that is great in and of itself, which I love, in my heart, I want the best day of a 10-year-old's life to be he hit a home run at Little League that day, or he got a bike for Christmas, or they're going to go to Disney or do something, not the fact that he no longer has to fear bullying in his school. And so I had these ranges of emotions of reading this youngster's message, which was elated that you guys are awesome and you're killing it, but yet this kid went through the spike of...
It's funny when my phone rings at home, and it's Jason. I have a picture of him on my phone in his wrestling singlet. That's the one that pops up, so he looks kind of weird. Like if you know what a wrestling singlet is, sure. It's skin tight, and when it pops up on my phone when it rings, and when it rings, my kids always say, "Oh, it's your boyfriend calling," because I'll talk to him sometimes 5 to 7 times every day of the year. And the majority of our conversations are him driving home from school saying, "I got to tell you what happened today." And it's just how this message and components of it that we call it the lab. He's been in the lab for 20 years. And the first 10 years of his life, he spent making boys into men and men into champions. And then he realized after Evan and some other things that he was just focused on the wrong thing. He was making kids physically fit, just not empathetically fit. And our whole, our discussion year round is just the lives that we've changed. And likewise, when I'm driving home from a presentation, I'm calling him and saying, "Man, you're not going to believe this." And sometimes it's like a one-upsmanship, and I don't mean it in a negative way, like let me talk about my hopeless situation, it's worse than your hopeless situation. But every time I hang up, whether it's at home or I'm in my car driving home, my head just swims, and I think, how is this the same everywhere throughout America? I mean, everywhere we go, there's kids. Rick and I were in Pennsylvania a couple of years ago. I mean, I could give you 50 stories from this school year alone. But remember it was second row back, second seat in, 1,000 kids in the audience, and a young lady had a bonnet on. And she never made eye contact with me, which was very unusual because I'm running around high energy nonstop. And she never looked at me. And I was over there half the time in the auditorium. I don't know if I've ever told you this story. And she wouldn't look up, but she caught my eye because of the bonnet she had on. And after I'm done the presentation, I have the customary group of kids taking pictures, chatting with them, and I feel this piece of paper slide into my hands. And if you go to my desk, above my desk, it's laminated today, and it's a bunch of highlighter on it. And it's this story of her dad died unexpectedly, her 3 brothers burned to death in their house fire. She has a golf ball-sized mass on her lungs, not enough food to eat. Mom works 3 or 4 jobs, no heat in her house. I don't know if you know what that feels like. I sure don't. All winter in the Northeast. And talks about the club that they made called the Amish Mafia. They try to ruin her life because she smells like a barn when she comes in every day because she's got to do her chores. And she even has a line there that says, the kids asked me if I got a picture of my brother's ashes, after he burned to death, her 3 brothers. And she talks about how she's tried to take her own life. And I mean, these are the kids these are our American children, our students, the ones that we love the most, supposed to. And these are the stories that we get to hear across America. And it's easy to watch commercials of these great stories and great things that are happening in people's lives, but this is the reality of where so many of our kids are. And we can point fingers and blame identity politics and this and that and jump on this bandwagon and that bandwagon, but I mean, here's a guy that's, in the lab, in the trenches with these kids, and I can't even fathom the kids' lives that he deals with on a regular basis. I get to look at those kids once or twice in the face, and then I, connect with them over Snapchat or Instagram and, send as much hope across that wire as I can. But he's got to look at them every single day.
Yeah, there's this emptiness, I think, that's just generally, it's not all doom and gloom, but I think when we start playing our song of hope and action, when we start getting real with kids, there's an appreciation, there's a warmth, there's a comfort, there's an attention. And really the best way to classify it, and this is great perspective for parents, it's one of our pillows, is the connection over content. And what a lesson, I'm going to work with an athletic team on Wednesday, because I think that the coach is a little too focused on his content, and I think the athletes are way too focused on their content, so I'm going to work on conversations to create some connection. And I think that that's going to have a really profound impact on their synergy as a team. So in any role we have as a parent, there's content, right? And discipline and accountability, responsibility, and family values and rules and expectations. But it's really about connection. Any human relationship starts with connection. And to classify the work that we're doing, and when we go into a school with Tom and Rick, or when we get in front of teachers and remind them about that connection piece, that is so well received and so much appreciated that it can become the best day of a kid's life, because very few people truly connect with that kid. When you say I'm sorry to someone, that's a form of connection that they don't normally get, right? So as a teacher who's in a space with a kid and I blow their mind because I apologize to them, that kid's never been apologized to by an adult male. It really has a profound effect on a kid. So, the work that we're doing, there's a void that we're filling with it. And it makes, teachers, parents, kids think much differently about their day and their routine and their existence. And it's all about hope and action.
I think, we talk a lot. I think we spend more time on hope than we do anything. And it's just because we play in the space of hopelessness. And again, it's not to wave this big scary flag of hopelessness. I mean, one of our pillows is behavior as a form of communication. And I'd say this generation is communicating with their own hands We're not paying attention to it. But the other side of this coin that we don't spend enough time in stuff like this talking about, I feel like in schools we do, is this action piece. And there's an educator years ago, Herbert Spencer, said the great aim of education is never knowledge, it's action. Like you can, educate yourself into stupefaction, into imbecility. And I think those are Malcolm Muggeridge's words. And you can do that all you want, but it doesn't change anything. Action changes everything. And our goal is to teach young people how to jump into action. And this gets more into the meat of our message. And, you got to drill a kid and, in order for them to be good at throwing a baseball the right way. Why aren't we drilling kids to be able to deliver empathy the right way and consistently over time, especially to be able to recognize the kids that need it the most? And we've got this little brand of something we call compassionate empathy. And I think one of the biggest problems with empathy today is compassion's being taken out of it. I mean, we all can know there's a couple kinds of empathy, and you got cognitive empathy, which you're like, I stubbed my toe, and you're like, oh, I bet that hurt. And I think that that's what this device, people, I think, believe they're more empathetic than they really are because they see all this stuff that happens and then they say, oh, I know how that feels. But compassion, the ability to alleviate someone's suffering, and that's truly what compassion is we don't practice that element of empathy. So we've just kind of, I don't want to say we've rediscovered something, but we've taken and we've said, hey, we need compassionate empathy. More on the affective domain, capital A, affective empathy, which is another kind of empathy. And that's really what our whole brand of empathetic fitness is made up of, is having these kids practice these things that they probably cognitively, intuitively know doesn't feel good for someone, but what are you doing to alleviate that kid's suffering? And then to do that repeatedly. And then, Jason has really discovered, and again, not that we've self-discovered this, but it becomes a real addiction for kids. You get a kid, he had a kid, Brandon, years ago, who was supposed to have a knife fight with a kid in the 7th grade. And Jason reformed him. And he went to Everest and did it for a kid with special needs or something not too long ago. And he's at Boston College now, and he's a male cheerleader, which is amazing because you talk about vulnerability, especially for a rough, tough guy to be able to do that. He's one of the kids that's gone, it gives me chills thinking about that young man who I know as well. But Jason, drilled him and forced him to be uncomfortable and to become more empathetic to kids that needed it the most. And he did it with a young man who didn't want to come to school because some girls in the bus were calling him gay. And Jason took that young man, Brandon, had him jump into action consistently and change someone's life. And now the kid's a male cheerleader going to Mount Everest to help people. Come on.